I want to welcome you to IFTF Foresight Talks. This is the last Foresight Talk of the year, and it is on building an aspirational vision for the future New Zealand food system. And before we get into hearing from our guests, please do introduce yourself, let us know where you're located, and make sure you've selected all panelists and attendees rather than just the host and the panelists. We are going to be looking for your questions either in the Q&A or the chat. You're welcome to put them in either place as you learn more about this amazing work that Ian and Justine have been doing. So we'll save about 20 to 25 minutes at the end of our conversation for questions. So we really want to make this an opportunity for you to ask questions about the practice, the craft, the approach of doing foresight. As I said, we will be speaking with Ian, who is Global Head of Agribusiness for KPMG, and Justine, who is a Director of Consulting at KPMG. And this webinar is being recorded and will be made available. For those of you who don't know about the Institute for the Future, we are an independent nonprofit organization. We were founded in 1968, and we provide tools, education, and research. And we are really focused on the application of strategic foresight to transformative action that leads to transformative action. And I think that's really, we have a wonderful example today of exactly that. Part of this, these talks are part of our overall training portfolio where we're helping people, we're providing resources to the community for learning how to apply futures thinking and foresight. And you can take a class with us. You can see all the different kinds of classes we have here, or you can avail yourself of all of the different learning resources we have, like today's conversation with these incredible practitioners. And I'm going to stop sharing right now and just introduce Ian and Justine. Ian and Justine, you have been, Ian in particular, I think you have been involved for over 2 years on a journey as the secretariat leader of something called the Monokai Initiative. And the Monokai Initiative it's a dialogue, it's many things. It's a dialogue, it is a collaboration, it is a discussion, it is a circle. It involves all parts of your national food system. And it's really about reframing and kind of re-envisioning the outcomes of a future food system that serves multiple stakeholders. So it's a future food system that feeds people in such a way that it transforms the health outcomes of your country. It preserves productive ecosystems. It creates both a prosperous and a resilient agro-food sector. And it also moves your country, New Zealand, more closer to a zero carbon future. And the other thing that you're doing with Monokai is you are aiming to create a national food roadmap. So it's, I think, just an incredible example what you both are doing in applying strategic foresight to systems level problems and working with multiple stakeholders to really create change and to drive action. So I'd love to turn it over to Ian and Justine. I'm happy to share the slides if you want, Ian, or if you'd like to just start by speaking, it's up to you.
Maybe if we bring the slides up, then I'll chat them through quickly, and then we can have a discussion about them. And I'll probably go first and have a talk specifically about Monokai, and then Justine can probably talk a little bit as well about how else we've been integrating, I suppose, both Monokai and the strategic foresight work that we've sort of developed with the Institute over the last few years in relation to the future of the food system in New Zealand. So firstly, it's just good afternoon for us. It's just midday here in New Zealand. So good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity, Lynn, to have this chat today. So as you mentioned, I lead KPMG's Global Agribusiness Network. That's a network that has professionals working in more than 50 countries around the world. And we work with organizations throughout the food system, from some very small farming businesses right up to some of the largest players in the global agri system. And I suppose one of the things that's been standing out for us as a team around the world, and the next slide highlights this really clearly, is the risks that are being faced by food systems around the world and food system participants. This is a piece of work we did with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development using our dynamic risk assessment tool. And this came out of some work we started back in 2017, 2018, and this is the 2021 version of that work, where we worked with some of the major food companies globally to look at how risks are connecting within the food system. And when those risks connect, how quickly they connect, and what are the combined impacts of risks when they do connect. What stood out for me when we did this work and the previous piece of work we did in this area was, if anything connects with climate change, it seems to become a much larger and faster problem. And if you think about our food system, when we've got climate change and we've got the diminishing biodiversity that we're hearing about very much from COP15 at the moment, and we've got this disconnection between trying to take a long-term perspective of how we think about our environment and nature versus trying to make sure we've got enough food to feed people in the short term, which has become a particular focus during the pandemic, as well as challenges like soil degradation or some of the other areas, food quality and affordability, which is a fundamental challenge across many in the farming system, the economics of a simple farming business under a lot of pressure and now significantly increasing pressure. We're facing a food system that is incredibly, I suppose, challenged with what its future looks like. And where that's led us to, and this comes up quite clearly on the next slide, is that those questions are now being the sort of questions that I go around and talk to our clients globally are asking us. They're saying, how do we respond to some of these challenges, which if you put them into an SDG context, where the SDGs and SDG 2 talks about an aspiration to get to zero hunger. Yet prior to the pandemic, we had 690 million people that weren't able to be fed sufficient food every day. And that's got worse. And if we look at the move from having potentially about 500,000 people in our country as food insecure to over 1 million people, and thinking about New Zealand, we're a country that grows enough food to feed 40 million people, yet we're not actually able to feed our own country. So that has become a real question over the last couple of years. We've got real health challenges with the global food system. About 13% of adults globally are obese, and about 340 million children, which is quite a sizable number of people. New Zealand, we have some of the worst outcomes in the OECD on those sort of key control or non-communicable disease metrics. So we have to really think about how we do that. Then the same sort of questions being asked around gender equity, about water availability, the amount of food being wasted by food systems around the world, soil degradation, and obviously climate change as well, which for us in New Zealand is a significant issue because around 50% of our emissions come from agriculture, and a huge percentage of our emissions are methane because of the fact it comes out the back of animals, and we've got a very animal-based agricultural system. So where we've got to, and what came through very clearly in the period post-pandemic, was a strong narrative that actually the food sector that we work with, the commercial part of the food system, needs to think about how it becomes part of the solution to these challenges, as opposed to being held up as the cause of the problem. So how do you transform from being the problem to becoming the solution? And the industry itself could have gone about a process of doing that. And the Aotearoa Circle, who's the sponsoring partner of the Monokai initiative, along with an organization called AgMart, the Agricultural Marketing, Research and Development Trust, who, they could have said, let's think about this and think about it purely through the lens of their traditional members, their traditional partners, in terms of purely the food production system. But what we decided to do, and this sort of comes up on the next slide, is do something quite different. And we decided that actually, when we looked around the world, everybody else had a food strategy. New Zealand, despite the fact, we are a small country that exports a lot of food, has an economy, therefore, that's highly dependent on food. We didn't have a food strategy. So the initial conversation was based around, actually, why don't we start some work on the back of what was seen during the pandemic, on the back of this rise in food insecurity, to think about putting together a New Zealand food strategy. Everybody else has got one, we should have one. And that was a piece of work. We went and did the desktop research. We looked at food strategies that have been written around the world. And by God, were they boring. And the reality is, they're all very much the same. They all talked about the same sort of stuff. And they all generally focused on 2 or 3 issues. One was the health that comes from the food system. One was the environmental impacts of the food system, and one was the economics of the food system and the economic contribution it makes. None of them picked up on all 3. And the work that we did also said none of them had anything distinct about their own country, about where they were from. And we felt that anything we do needed to balance 4 factors. It needed to balance our environment, which is under pressure, and we've got to ensure that we regenerate our environment so it's productive into the future and available for future generations. We felt it had to make sure that it was taking account of the health outcomes our food system delivers, and that's become a really important part of our focus moving forward. It had to take account of where it was from. It had to be off New Zealand and inherently off this country, because we are in a unique country, in a unique place in the world at the bottom of the South Pacific. And it also had to recognize that our country generates 80% of its tradable wealth from growing and selling things to the world, whether that's food or fiber products. And balancing those meant we found nothing that we could use as a template. We also recognized that actually getting to a strategy was going to be incredibly difficult. So we made 3 decisions early and a 4th decision very soon after making those 3. The first one was to go broad. This wasn't going to be a piece of work that was going to purely encompass the usual voices from the industry being heard again. It had to be thinking about the whole system, not just production, but every aspect of how food is integrated into our society. The second one, it had to be inclusive. There was no voice that wasn't going to be welcome at the table. And we had to be prepared to take the time to listen to all those voices. So what we set off with as a 6-month project became a 2.5-year project through to releasing it on the 30th of November, because that's how long it took to listen to the voices. It's also how long it took for us as a secretariat and leadership group to go backwards at times to be able to move forward together, because at times we had to go back and recheck where we were coming from to check we were on the right track. And then thirdly, it had to take Maori custom, Maori wisdom, Maori knowledge into account. So it had to be framed in a Te Ao Maori framing. And that's using what we refer to as mataranga or indigenous knowledge. And the next slide brings up the first step we consequently took. So rather than produce a strategy, we decided that we were going to produce an articulation of the purpose and values of our food system, and an articulation that could ultimately be framed in the, I aspire to be part of a food system that does X, Y, and Z, so that people could buy into the values of the system and integrate those into their own strategies, into their own businesses. We also wanted to ensure that we identified the areas between existing initiatives that were already incredibly powerful and tried to provide something that would enable those initiatives to connect with other initiatives. So how do we fill the gaps? Or if something's missing, how do we ensure that bit that's missing can happen? So this was our first starting point, and this is called what we refer to effectively as our Monokai Framing. So it's our initial piece of work. We involved an amazing gentleman called Shay Wilson, who joined the leadership group to help develop this, and did some fantastic, and is a true expert in Te Maori, deep knowledge about how the environment works and how the whakapapa, or the history, the ancestry of that knowledge has come about. And probably the most important thing we did, and Shay did, is took us down a track which, rather than starting with a human being at the center of the food system work, we started by putting the environment at the center. And that's what we refer to as tuakana taina. We as humans are the junior to the natural world, and our role is to ensure the natural world is supported and preserved. And if we look after the natural world, it will provide us with abundance. And that's at the core of this framework. Shay then gave us a series of
Did we lose Ian? Justine, I can see you're there. Do you want to come off mute and
Yeah, I'm not sure what's happened to Ian. Seems to have frozen.
I'm sure he'll come back shortly, but would you like to would you want to continue, or?
Are you still there, Ian?
There he
is.
I think
I'm
again.
Back.
You're back.
I think it is 12:18 and people are streaming for lunch. If actually what I might just do quickly is flick across and just power that therefore off here. I'll just flick, so I changed to go off my phone hotspot.
Oh, good.
Which should be more reliable.
Great. Justine was ready to pick up, so.
Cool.
Uh-oh, he looks like he's frozen again to me. Well, let me just remind people to put, as you're hearing about this incredible journey and project, this is a chance to ask questions if you are trying to do something that might take a similar approach, if you're trying to bring together a similarly diverse set of constituents or stakeholders. All questions are fair game. I think Ian appears to be frozen.
Yeah, I wonder, Lynn, if I talk about a couple while we're waiting for Ian to come back, if I talk about a couple of supplementary projects that link to just what you were saying about how you get diverse groups together and how we what we've done to get diverse groups together to move forward. Would that be helpful if I do that while we're waiting for Ian?
Sure. Let me stop sharing and over to you, Justine.
Yeah, so there's two supplementary pieces of work that I can see Ian is just coming back. Are you back, Ian?
Yeah, apologies for that.
No problem.
Okay, we'll switch back to you again.
Should be stable now.
Okay, very good. Why don't we just take a couple minutes to finish this part up, and then we can,
So just quickly running through this, and I know that I posted the link into the chat, so please feel free to go and read the detail. I won't run through it all now, but just to pull out some of the key features here, we talked about the use of integrating traditional knowledge with modern science, and that comes up under the concept of mataranga. So not actually just accepting Western wisdom as being the complete wisdom, but actually what can we learn from traditional ways of doing things. Manakitanga, which is the I suppose the role of hosting and the role of food in creating societal connection, but also in the way of generosity and sharing food is really important within Maori culture. And we, as a country at New Zealand that welcomes a lot of tourists, that's an important role of how we as a society should be thinking as well, both within people in our society and people visiting us. And probably the other one I'd pull out is Aurora, which is health. And there we're talking about the ability of food to deliver health and wellness, but not just health and wellness, but also joy, as inherently part of the food experience. And that for us is much broader than just saying food exists to provide health, but food actually exists to provide so much more in terms of how people live their lives. Maybe if we just flick to the next slide. One of the things we did do, which was really fascinating, was we asked our participants, and we had about 130 organizations with around 200 people from those organizations representing all aspects of the food systems, from our very largest companies, from our big retailers, right the way through to people working with our most vulnerable communities, and smallholding farmers and growers, and eaters and restaurateurs, so people that represented all aspects of our food system. And we asked them to talk about their future vision for our system. And you can see some beautiful quotes here, food sovereignty and food security, fairness and hororo, encompassing kaitiakitanga or guardianship, stewardship of our society, sustainable for both human and planetary health, equitable so everyone can afford a healthy kai or healthy food. Mana kai is food in Maori. And sustainable utilization of our natural resources for both nutrition of people and societal and economic benefits. So you can see what we use futures to identify was the landing pads, the common ground that people had. And every time people were talking about the role of food in securing health, securing our environment, creating prosperity for our society. And they were the points of connection. The aspiration for the future became what we could build on. And we built that into our action plan. And I've just summarized here on the next slide what we how we articulated the action plan. So we took what we had received from Shay, what we'd been gifted from Shay in terms of our Te Ao Māori vision, and we built that up into language that was accessible to everybody. And attached to that, both some goals and aspirations where we talk about a food system that people could commit to, and then what that would actually mean in terms of the actions we should be taking. And you can see we've grouped that into 3 key areas: mana o te taio, or the life force that we collect from the natural environment; mana o te tangata, the harvesting and distribution of food for people, so tangata is people; and then mana kai, the sustenance that we gain from food, both economic and I suppose cultural and health-based sustenance. And what we're going to do in terms of the actions that we have articulated or suggested that get accelerated is take that framing and put that into what we're referring to as the Monocypo, which effectively will be a pledge that any organization, any person, any entity that operates within our food system will be able to sign up to say, I am a Monokai organization. I commit to a food system that secures our sustainable environment, health and nutrition to all in our society, accessible food, and prosperity from food and fiber products that we can grow. So actually, the articulation is this is not going to be something that's constrained or limited, but everybody can see a role that they can play, an area where they can focus on to build a mana kai food system for New Zealand. And then we've identified some very specific actions, things like the community food platform, which is about how we address the immediate food affordability and availability issues we have in our society, making sure that in schools we're not just providing people with meals, but we're thinking about how we elevate food in our school system. So we teach people about nutrition, we talk about the impacts on health, and we actually ensure that food guidelines we have are used and followed across our school system. And a couple that I'm really passionate about. One's the ocean legacies concept, because I see the future of the food system as not just being derived from food on the land, but significantly more food coming from the blue economy, from the ocean. And for New Zealand, that's a massive opportunity. 93% of our economic area is ocean, so we can capitalize on that. And then regenerative farming pathways is about how we actually do bring together all the great work that's being done right across our country in terms of how we transform our farming systems from where they are today to a more regenerative future, but to do that in a way that enables farmers to see a simple set of steps that they can take, rather than something that's quite daunting, and therefore making the first step becomes really difficult. And the final one, which is we've got to the point in New Zealand where we can't afford not to, is to have a conversation about biotechnology and ensure that we are thinking about technologies like gene editing and understanding what they play in our future. And that's, again, going to be another great opportunity for us to bring future thinking into how we create scenarios around what that might look like for the use of these technologies, and therefore what might be the best decisions for New Zealand to create the future we want to be part of. So that's a bit of an overview. Apologies for dropping off halfway through, but
No. This is it's such comprehensive, creative, and just generative work. So thank you for sharing that overview with us. Justine, I am going to open it up to questions from the audience in a moment, and I have a lot of questions myself, but I'm going to let the audience be framing some of those. Do you want to, what else would you like to share with us that you think would be helpful for a group of people who are trying to, just improve our ability to apply foresight and futures thinking for transformative action?
Yeah, so I might talk about an adjacent piece of work that we did briefly. So that was supporting the development of a horticulture strategy for New Zealand. So in that work, we needed to consider growers of the horticulture products. We also needed to think about producers who are going to make food products from the ingredients. We needed to think about Maori, we needed to think about scientists, and we also needed to think about government and their role in supporting the horticulture sector. So one of the things that we did was we used futures to create a number of plausible but provocative visions for the horticulture sector. So those of you familiar with the tools, we took signals of change, identified those. We also had some drivers, and then we combined those to create some scenarios around what could a possible future be for the horticulture sector. And then we worked with a governance group to work through those different ones to see what would be a suitable one to consult with the sector. I think some of the benefits of doing that was it really forced the group to think about who would win with this vision and who would lose, so that they could think about those difficult choices they needed to make as a governance group, and then what they were going to consult on. And when we went out for consultation, we were also part of the consultation, which was a privilege to hear from all the people in the sector about the challenges that they face. It was a much more in-depth and meaningful, deeper conversation than if we hadn't used those tools, and actually resulted in an interesting outcome for the strategy. So through the consultation, it emerged that there needed to be two types of strategy for the horticulture sector. So one for the domestic market in New Zealand, and then another one for companies who actually export. There was quite a discrepancy in terms of how they saw the work that was required. And I think that was really well received, the futures work we did, but there were some challenges, I think, initially in terms of educating people about the tools and the benefits of futures, and explaining how the process all works together, because everybody, I think, wants to jump to action immediately, but actually explaining how it's worth doing the explorative work, the research work. And I think, yeah, we've come out with a much better outcome than if we hadn't used that work. So that's an example of where we've used the futures work.
Right. Thank you. It has just been such an honor for us to be kind of partnering with you to contribute in the ways that we can to what you're doing. We've got a couple of questions. I am going to open it up now. Quinault Childs is here with us, and he is the director of our Food Futures Lab. And he has such a nice question here, Quinn, which is that you are taking into account a lot of powerful and probably uncommon principles when you're thinking about strategy, especially strategy in terms of a government, government strategy, corporate strategy. These are a lot of these words and concepts are not generally brought to bear in those spaces, at least in the conversations I've been in. So joy, indigenous knowledge, planetary health, and how are you able to communicate these things at an institutional level? And what are some of the challenges or resistance that you may have received? Ian, you painted a very nice picture, which is we began with indigenous knowledge, but certainly because it's an uncommon approach, how did you do that? How did that work?
That's why it took 2.5 years. Is probably the and I mentioned when I was talking that at times we had to go backwards to go forwards, and that at times was really intentional. At times we needed to have the leadership group together in a room. One of the key parts of how we've been able to work this and ensure that it's landed right across the food system with all the different communities and all the different interests is we were very intentional about that leadership group that we brought together to help lead the project. It included people from Tangas Whenua, from Maori communities. It included some of our very senior leaders of some of our very largest food producers. It included somebody that works in depth with vulnerable communities and leads, I suppose, the connection with government for many of our city missions. So organizations that are inherently working to address the food vulnerabilities and insecurities we have in our society. We included science, we included people from government. So we had representatives of the Ministry for Primary Industries and the Ministry for the Environment within the leadership group. So it was a matter of bringing those together, but ultimately bringing those groups together meant at times our leadership group did not agree. And that meant we had to have some very honest conversations. But the fact is, we had taken the time to identify, using the aspirational futures, where the commonality was, and we brought people back to those common places. And that then enabled us to say, well, going down that track doesn't work for one community. What do we need to do to make sure it works for everybody? So a good example of that is when I wrote the first draft of the purpose and values document, got some very clear feedback from our corporate members of the group that it really read like the expectation was that the industry would subsidize food in New Zealand, which was never our intention, but that was how they were reading it. So that needed us to rethink that through another lens, and that actually led us down the track of creating one of our actions, which is the how we get a fast response to food insecurity and price vulnerability we've got at the moment. So, that then meant a lot of time with government, a lot of time working with people from our communities, a lot of time people working from the health system to work out how we actually get to a common place for each of those actions. So that, it has been hard. We were lucky we had the time. We weren't working to a political time frame that meant we had to deliver something on a particular date. And we could take that time to go backwards. But, at times it's also been a little bit frustrating. But the value is, we are pleased that we could launch this on the 30th of November. We launched it at our National Field Days, which is our biggest agri-food event of the year. And we had our Minister of Agriculture stand up and acknowledge this is an incredibly important contribution to the debate for New Zealand's food system. And we hope to see, a real response from that. We've got 31 government agencies at the moment involved in the food system. If we can get a single agency that takes a whole of system approach, that will be a transformational step for our food system.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to get to Bessier, to your question in one moment, but just for a little more context, give us a sense about, when you're talking with all these different stakeholders, with different needs and visions about the future and the idea of a common future, how far ahead in the future were you talking about? Did you set a specific time frame? Did you do some experimentation with helping people think ahead to the future? Did you just leave that open to their own interpretation? How did that work?
We guided them a little bit. So we guided them towards a time frame of 2035.
Okay.
As what would a food system look like? But equally, the model that we've designed, the purpose and values model, isn't timed to 2035, because some of the things that people aspire to cannot be done in those timeframes, particularly when we're talking about some of the biological challenges we need to get our mind around. So actually the overall model, I aspire to a food system that is really something that's intended to be a future that's sort of indefinite, that it's out there without a time frame. It is a food system that, if it's working in that way, it works forever. So when we were talking to people and having the interviews and discussions with them, we didn't say, well, what do you want the food system that your great grandchildren are going to be like? It was, well, what do you aspire to in 15 years? But some of those aspirations, when we went through them, were just not possible within the timeframes, but they were still very valid, and therefore we've articulated the overall vision with a longer time frame than 15 years.
Because I think that's often one of the first questions we get from people is, how do I link something that is so far ahead with action that I can take today? And I imagine that for some of your different stakeholders, what they mean by the future may be different.
And I think the work that we did in the horticulture sector in parallel to this, Justine, that was probably really key part of that, is the timeframes, because that was something where time was much more of the essence, and it was a key area for us to discuss.
Yeah, that's right. But there were also some things that became far too ambitious to achieve in the time frame that was originally proposed. So it was interesting to see, the urgency of some things, but also acknowledgement that other things are going to take a lot longer, and so we need to have steps towards achieving the ultimate outcome.
And let's talk a little bit about, because I know you've had a lot of engagement from government and from the heads of, as you said, some of your largest companies and the social sector, education, technology. You had so many different, and you said that you're aiming to create what you call a national food map, a national food roadmap. Does that already exist? Is that the next step? What happens next? And what are some of the actions that you've already seen? I know you just launched this formally, but you've been in conversations for 2.5 years. What are some of the actions that you're starting to see come out of it?
So the roadmap that we've put together at the moment is what we're calling the priority action plan. So that's also available on the Monokai initiative website, which the link was posted into the chat earlier. So there's 8 actions in that, and that's those actions I alluded to. And the way we've articulated those actions is we've not made them highly precise, but what we have done under each of those actions is we have articulated what needs to happen and the types of organizations that can make those things happen. So what we've tried to do is create actions where we know there are certain groups that want to progress them and accelerate them, but equally we've tried to give everybody a window into how they could be part of that action as well, if it aligns to an area they focus on or want to work in. So effectively, the future of the initiative has been something we've spent a lot of time as a group talking about, because you could create a whole lot more, organizations and processes and controls and constraints. But actually that goes against the idea of a social movement, which is about everybody being able to connect with it and join. So we have gone more with something that's more informal and more able to enable people who choose to participate to get involved and commit to do things. Some of the actions already happening, we are seeing large companies connecting with, say, Maori iwi, Maori tribes, and looking at how they can help lift food resilience in those communities, but equally at the same time, how they can work with those communities to create economic benefit by, shaping or reshaping how they maybe use their land. We are seeing an initiative in one region in New Zealand, which is working across the health system, the social system, as well as other elements of the food system, and looking at how they can create a transformational change model to improve the health of young people. And that's also heavily integrating into our schools. So these, the good thing is we got the framing out there that I talked to early. So that's been out and in the public domain now for about 18 months. So people have already picked up the framing and started to think about how they can connect with that. The conversations we've had have encouraged people to think more about it. But, we are now 2 weeks in, and we're in December at the end of a very busy 2022. So really, what we're hoping is people reflect on it over the summer break for us over the next couple of weeks. And then in early 23, we come back invigorated to work out how we supercharge some of these activities.
I love it. We were just talking before this started, speaking of health, about how New Zealand basically shuts down for at least a couple of weeks, and no one really has to worry too much because everyone is trying to take a break and relax a little bit. And I wanted to get to your question, Basir, and feel free to come off mute and ask if I don't get it right. But you said, are the Maoris able to relay their knowledge to the broader world? Some of the indigenous knowledge that's sort of at the root of this national strategy and initiative. What about farmer to farmer exchange in spreading information sharing about Foresight best practices, or KPMG running it as a social enterprise? Basir, okay, sorry, I don't know if you have, I guess you don't have the ability to come off. I don't know how this particular meeting works, but put more questions in the chat if that didn't get to what you were asking.
So sort of three things there then.
Yes.
So maybe if I cover the second two first, and then we'll come back to the point about the sharing of Maori and indigenous wisdom, because Justine's probably got something to add to that in terms of her work, particularly with our government. So farmer to farmer exchange is critical to trying to create a vision of future. We're in a really challenging place with many farmers in New Zealand at the moment. We are moving into a new world where we've got to decarbonize our food system, and that's creating real pressures of change and concerns around change. So I suppose one of the things we are seeing is farmers wanting to try and get a vision of what the future looks like. So actually, one of the things that we've done as part of KPMG, which you can almost call a social enterprise, what was to partner with the Institute for the Future, along with AgMart, who also partnered with us on the Aotearoa Circle project. And we've run a couple of specifically highly tailored food futures workshops which have involved representatives from some of the largest organizations in the food system that work with farmers to actually try and lift that foresight capability right across the industry, both from the boardroom right the way down. And, already we are seeing some really good outcomes coming from their work, thanks mainly to Justine, Lynn, Quinn, and Sarah and Max as well before that. The ability to get that project up and running during the pandemic and actually deliver these sessions was a huge amount of work. But it has been something we've been really pleased to partner with the Institute to do, because we needed that foresight knowledge in the sector. We need to be able to create plausible visions of the future, which are at times slightly ridiculous, and provoke ourselves, because in a world where we're talking about fermenting and culturing and doing all these new modern food techniques, we need to challenge ourselves with some of these techniques, and I think we are starting to move in the right direction. In relation to the sharing of indigenous wisdom, that was a real concern for us when we were putting this together. It was the right course to take, but getting it so it could be communicated to the wider community was a real challenge. And I think, therefore, when you read our document, our purpose and values document, we have a lot of words in it, and the words are there intentionally because they translate the Maori concepts into understandable English language phrasings and framing. They're people that are not as au fait with indigenous wisdom, with Te Maori thinking, with Mataranga, can actually pick up and run with. But I think, Justine, this is an area that, is challenging a lot of organizations at the moment, that we recognize as really important wisdom that comes from our traditional knowledge, but making sure that you can connect the two and make it powerful is something that's taking a lot of time and effort.
Yeah, and there's a big focus from our government for the last few years that all government-related work thinks about the benefit to Maori and the impact to Maori of any work that we're doing, and that's really embedded now. I think a couple of things I'd mention as well. It's really important for us in the work we do that we're getting really good representation of Maori views, so that we're not asking one single Maori person to represent all of Maoridom and speak on behalf of everybody. That actually takes a lot of time as well to hear different views from different people in Maoridom, and so that's really important to build that time and making sure we've got the right connections. And I think the other thing that we heard quite a lot, particularly on that horticulture sector work that I spoke about, is that it needs to be authentic. So the people who are speaking about Indigenous knowledge and using it as marketing for their products, that it has to be authentic, and actually that we're not taking that away from Maori people and just slapping it on to products. That has to be authentic.
Well, and I know that the entire initiative has two chairs. One is the executive chairman of KPMG in New Zealand, and the other is the head of one of the, I don't know if it's the largest Maori tribe or one of the largest tribes, but so you did have that, that partnership there for the whole initiative.
Yeah, and so Rangamari Hunie was our chair. Matt Pritchard was our co-chair.
Okay.
So Matt Soss, our executive chair. But Rangamari leads an organization, or led an organization, Ngāti Whātua Iraqi, which is one of the big tribes here in Auckland, a tribe that has quite a unique asset base because it owns a lot of the land in central Auckland, so a very, very valuable asset base. But I suppose more importantly for our initiative, Rangamari is also closely connected to the health system and connected to, was a real leader during the pandemic period in terms of both rolling out food responses and health responses across Maori communities, but also as chair of the Maori Fishing Commission, or what we call Tokum, Te Ohau Kaimoana, and she therefore is incredibly connected as well across our food system. So she was somebody that could connect us in and be testing what we were thinking about with chairs of iwi and Maori organizations across the country on an ongoing basis, which was super powerful for us.
Yeah, I just really appreciate the intentionality, the care, the time, the effort. Basir, it doesn't seem like you're able to. Are you able to speak, or?
I can speak. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, we can. Yep.
Wonderful.
Anything more that you would like to say? We have one more question I'd love to get to before we break, but do you want to have any final
Just
comment?
Such wonderful work and a great line of effort. We typically, I have a PhD, cultural anthropologist, a director, and wonderful executive directors, researchers. What I want to say is this: self-destructive delinquent behavior is typically countered by law, but self-destructive behavior against, I guess, the entire earth, agriculture, and so forth is not in any way penalized. So if we consider what you have at your hand as a driver of change, how can we strategically distribute it? Because throughout your presentation, my entire strategic implication parts of my brain were running wild. And, perhaps not every farmer has access to Foresight. But what if KPMG is able to deliver it in the form of a social enterprise to a much larger farmer, kind of like a hackathon in the form of a weekend or a hackathon month, in which you could actually reach out to farmers, pressure groups, and get things synchronized? Because I've noticed also we've asked similar questions at the same time, sequenced in such a way with the research manager of IFTF. So that's also an effect of synchronicity, Jung. I mean, I'm not a psychologist.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Basir.
Yeah, so for us, that's the process we're now moving into in terms of how we share this knowledge, share this wisdom, and spread it more widely. And so that's, there's a whole range of things that we could lean into. Interestingly, we are looking at doing a regional, so across Asia Pacific, hackathon in relation to the blue economy, and the opportunities inherent in that, and bringing multiple dimensions to that conversation, because I don't think any of these solutions for how we transform our food system from where it is today to one that's inherently good for people's health, ensures accessibility of food, and enables all communities involved in the production of food to share in the prosperity that food generates is going to come with really easy solutions. It's going to take fundamental change across how our whole food system works. We're doing a fascinating piece of work at the moment, looking at some of those issues in relation to beef coming from rainforests and areas that are being overfished in some of our oceans. So there's a lot more work needs to be done, but there is some massive opportunities in front of us to create a completely different way of our food system working.
Okay, I'm going to squeeze in one more question from Serena May, who's curious to know about any hopeful future scenarios you may see in the realm of synthetic biology, gene editing, that kind of application in the ag space.
I probably should let Justine come in, given her PhD, but I'll have my say first. So I think there's a huge amount of hopeful opportunity in that space for those technologies to be used in a way that augments the outcomes that we achieve in our food system. I think historically, the narrative around some of the biotech and synthetic solutions has been inherently that they are bad, and the companies that produce them acknowledge that they haven't helped that situation themselves at times. But when I look forward at the moment, we as a country have had effectively a ban on the use of many of these GM solutions now since the 1990s. We are moving towards a point where we can have a mature conversation around some of these technologies, because we can see they have wider benefits than purely economic returns to whoever's produced them, but they can be inherently connected to achieving more ethical the outcomes we aspire to from our food system. And it doesn't necessarily mean that every technology has to be adopted or everybody has to use those technologies. It's about working out what the right pathway is. So for me, the key for any country is to ensure that you are having regular, mature conversations around these issues, as opposed to just letting them drift. And we've let it drift now for far too long in New Zealand.
And we're definitely
is a key word there. Not all governments are capable of that at all times. So yes, Justine, please.
I was going to just add and in our conversations in the agri sector recently, we're seeing a lot of appetite for those kind of technologies, particularly in climate change adaptation. So I think the appetite is increased in New Zealand, and I think some people feel a little bit left behind, that they're not able to access some of those products and that technology that some of their competitors overseas are able to. So I think there's big appetite for that conversation to happen in New Zealand.
Very good. Well, I want to thank you, first of all, so much. And the work is just so impressive. So as we were talking before we started, it's really the beginning of something. I know it feels like the end of something, but it's also really the beginning of something, which I'm sure will yield fruit and all kinds of vegetables for the coming years. I want to quickly let folks know what is coming up. In the new year, our next talk like this will be from Trish Lavery, who is at the OECD. She'll be talking about how she uses Foresight in her work there. And coming up next year, right in February, actually, we have our first training, which will be in February, and that will be for an Asia Pacific time zone. So if you'd like to join us from that time zone, we have a training just for you online. We have all kinds of resources. We have our newsletter, we have our buddies, we have our Urgent Optimists community platform, and we're doing our best to provide folks with all kinds of resources for continued learning. If you are here from a large organization, we also have our Vantage program, which is a membership program, gives you access to Foresight councils, peer networks, training, research, a signals platform, a 10-year forecast, all kinds of things happening there. So I'm going to stop here, leave it there, and thank you. And I'm loving this. Thank you for the optimistic vision and platform and strategic approach, Ian and Justine. It really is refreshing and a really nice way to end the year. So thank you so much for making time for us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All righty. We will see everyone next time. To be continued. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.